The first thing Anise noticed was the weight. The bottle of 1982 Chateau Margaux was a solid, dense thing in her hand, a dark jewel of pressed grapes and thyme, heavy with the expectations of the man at table 12. He had ordered it without even glancing at the price, his voice a low, placid murmur that somehow cut through the restaurant's expensive hush more effectively than a shout ever could. The gilded cage prided itself on its quiet, on the sense that every conversation was a secret worth keeping. The second thing she noticed was the light. As she leaned in to pour, her movements practiced and fluid from years of service, the overhead pin light caught the edge of something inside the blonde woman's handbag. The bag, a crimson clutch that perfectly matched her dress and her sharp, predatory lipstick, was open just a fraction. A careless, telling detail. And in that sliver of an opening, a glint of gold and a sliver of dark blue. It was gone in a second, a trick of the light, but Anise's mind had already photographed it, catalogued it, and cross-referenced it against a lifetime of paying attention. She had grown up in a world where not paying attention got you hurt, where the smallest detail, a new car on the block, a shift in a neighbor's tone, the way a man held his hands, was a broadcast of intent. That glint was the star on a shield. The dark blue was the background of a police badge. Anise didn't falter. The wine flowed in a perfect, silent stream into the man's crystal glass, stopping precisely 1 inch from the rim. Her face remained a mask of professional neutrality, but inside, her world had tilted on its axis. The man, the one they called Mr. Ishida when they made the reservation, was Japanese, with a stillness about him that was more profound than simple calm. It was the stillness of a deep lake, hiding untold depths and dangers. He wore a tailored suit of charcoal gray that probably cost more than her car, and a watch on his wrist that was a subtle masterpiece of platinum and dark leather. He was handsome in a severe, sculpted way, his eyes holding the flat, patient look of a hawk. He was, by every metric Anise had learned to trust, a very dangerous man. The woman, Clara, was his opposite. All bright American glamour, with a cascade of blonde hair and a smile that was both dazzling and utterly vacant. She laughed a little too loudly, touched his arm a little too often. She was playing a role, and she was playing it with the desperate energy of an amateur. And now Anise knew what that role was. This wasn't a blind date. This was a sting. Anise straightened up, the heavy bottle now feeling like a weapon in her hand. Her gaze swept the room. She saw them now, the other pieces on the board. The 2 men in ill-fitting suits at the bar, nursing glasses of water. The black van parked across the street, its windows unnaturally dark. The whole restaurant, this gilded cage of wealth and performance, was a trap. And she, Anise, a 23-year-old waitress just trying to make rent, was standing right in the center of it. She had a choice. Say nothing. Walk away. Let the trap spring. It was the smart thing to do, the safe thing to do. But then her eyes met Mr. Ishida's. He wasn't looking at his date. He was looking at her. And in his dark, unreadable gaze, she saw a flicker of something she recognized, the quiet, weary awareness of a fellow creature who knew it was being hunted. Anise moved away from the table, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. Her training, the muscle memory of 1,000 shifts, took over. She collected an empty plate from table 9, offered more water at table 7, smiled at a patron who complimented the service. Each movement was precise, economical, a shield of normalcy she desperately needed. But behind the shield, her mind was a maelstrom. Why warn him? The question hammered at her. He was Yakuza or something just as bad. The papers were full of stories about men like him, extortion, violence, a world built on fear. The police were the good guys, weren't they? This was justice, playing out over a $500 bottle of wine. It was none of her business. But the image of the setup gnawed at her. It felt wrong, cowardly. The bright, brittle performance of the blonde woman, the clumsy staging of the men at the bar. It wasn't a confrontation, it was an ambush. It was a net being drawn tight around an animal that didn't even know it was caught. She had seen that before in her own life. She had seen powerful people set traps for those they deemed inconvenient, using smiles and promises as bait. She had learned early that the lines between good and bad were rarely so clearly drawn. Often it was just about who had the bigger cage. Her gaze drifted back to table 12. She watched Clara, the undercover cop. The woman's eyes were never still. They weren't on her date. They were scanning the room, checking the exits, subtly tracking the movements of the manager. She was a hunter, impatient for the kill. Then she looked at the man, Ren. That was the name he had given the hostess.
Thane.
He was watching too. But he wasn't looking at the exits. He was looking at the details. He saw the slight bulge under the jacket of the man at the bar. He saw the way the busboy kept glancing towards the front door, waiting for a signal. He saw the reflection of the street in the polished silver water pitcher, noting the black van that hadn't moved an inch in over an hour. He was mapping the trap from the inside. And then his eyes met Anis's again, a fleeting connection across the crowded room. It lasted no more than a second, but it was enough. There was no plea in his eyes, no fear. There was only a calm, dangerous intelligence. It was a look that said, I see you. I see that you see me. In that moment, Anis understood. This wasn't about saving a criminal. It was about a different kind of justice. It was about refusing to be a pawn in someone else's game. It was about kicking over the board. She made her decision.
Her shift was supposed to end at 10.
She had a life, a small apartment, a stack of bills waiting for her. Involving herself was madness. It was a choice that could unravel everything she had carefully built. But as she picked up a fresh linen cloth and a silver carafe of ice water, she knew she was going to do it anyway. Some part of her, the part that had survived everything life had thrown at it, refused to stand by and watch the cage door slam shut. She began to walk back towards table 12, her step steady, her purpose a cold, hard point of light in the chaos of her thoughts. The fate of everyone in this room was about to change, because of a waitress, a bottle of wine, and a single, whispered warning. The walk back to table 12 felt like crossing 100 miles of open ground. Every eye in the room seemed to be on her, every hushed conversation a commentary on her actions. The air was thick with unspoken words, with the electric hum of a storm about to break. Anis kept her breathing even, her expression placid. She was a ghost, a functionary, a part of the elegant machinery of the restaurant. That was her camouflage. She reached the table, her shadow falling over the pristine white tablecloth. Clara looked up, her smile a perfect, polished veneer. Ren's gaze remained on the wine swirling in his glass, but Anis could feel the weight of his attention, a physical pressure. He was waiting. She moved to his side, her body angled to shield her words from Clara. The water carafe was cold in her hand. "More water, sir?" she asked, her voice the epitome of professional deference. He gave a slight nod, never looking up. This was it. This was the moment the world fractured. As she leaned in, bringing the spout of the carafe to his glass, she lowered her voice to a breath, a whisper that would be lost in the ambient clink of silver and crystal. Her lips were inches from his ear. "She's an undercover cop," she said the words and felt them leave her, a payload of dangerous truth delivered in a murmur. "The badge is in her purse. The men at the bar are with her. It's a trap." She poured the water, her hand as steady as a surgeon's. Not a single drop was spilled. There was no outward reaction from him. No flinch, no sharp intake of breath. A lesser man would have given himself away. But Ren's control was absolute. The only sign he had heard her, that he understood the cataclysm she had just described, was an infinitesimal tightening of the muscles along his jaw. It was a flicker of tension, there and gone in a heartbeat. He slowly raised his head, and his eyes, dark and profound, met hers. And in their depths she saw it. Not gratitude, not yet. Not fear, certainly not. It was a look of cold, sharp evaluation. He was reassessing the entire world, and she was now at the center of his new calculations. He saw her not as a waitress, not as part of the background, but as an unknown variable, a player who had just made an impossible move. The shift was seismic. Clara, sensing the subtle change in the atmosphere, the sudden intensity of the silence between them, leaned forward. Her smile was a little tighter now, a little less certain. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her voice laced with a honeyed suspicion. Anis straightened up instantly, her own professional smile clicking back into place. She was an actress now, playing the most important role of her life. "Of course, madam," she replied, her tone light and airy. Just ensuring the gentleman's glass is full to his liking, she stepped back from the table, her duty performed. She had lit the fuse. Now, she could only watch it burn. The polite dinner conversation resumed, but it was a farce. The words were empty shells. The real conversation was happening in the silence, in the charged space between glances, in the new and terrifying awareness that bound the three of them together. Anis walked away, her back straight, but she could feel Ren's eyes on her, a focused, burning intensity that followed her all the way across the room. She was no longer invisible. She was an accomplice. Anis didn't return to her other tables. She busied herself at a service station near the kitchen doors, polishing silverware that was already gleaming. It gave her a vantage point, a reason to watch table 12 without being obvious. The game had changed, and she was a spectator with a front-row seat to a silent war. She saw Ren subtly alter his posture, a minute shift that opened up his view of the entire dining room. He continued his conversation with Clara, nodding, asking questions about her supposed career in art curation, but his focus was elsewhere. He was a general surveying a battlefield, counting enemy soldiers, mapping escape routes. Then came the test. With a quiet, almost apologetic murmur, Ren shifted in his seat, and his heavy linen napkin slid from his lap onto the floor beside his chair. It was a deliberate, calculated move. He made no effort to retrieve it. He simply waited. Clara was in the middle of a story, her hands gesturing animatedly. She didn't notice. But Anis did. It was a summons. Taking a deep breath, she walked over. "Allow me, sir." She bent down in a smooth, practiced motion, her back to Clara. As her fingers closed around the soft fabric of the napkin, Ren's voice reached her, a low, quiet rumble, perfectly masked by the restaurant's ambient noise. "The back exit. Staff only. Is it clear?" It wasn't just a question. It was a test of her knowledge, her competence, her commitment to the choice she had made. He was assessing her as a resource, as a potential ally. He needed to know if her warning was a fluke, a moment of impulsive pity, or if it came from a place of genuine situational awareness. Anis didn't hesitate. She rose, placing the folded napkin beside his plate without meeting his eyes. Her voice was just as low, just as controlled. "It leads to the kitchen alley. One door, steel reinforced. Trash pickup is at 10. The truck blocks the alley until then." She provided detail, tactical intelligence. The time, it was 9:45 p.m., was the most crucial piece of information. She was telling him he had a 15-minute window and a shield waiting for him. She had passed the test. A new, unspoken understanding flowed between them. He hadn't just been given information, he'd been given a viable plan. The pressure in the room ratcheted up another notch. One of the men at the bar subtly touched his earpiece. A silent command had been received. Across the table, a phone, placed face down, vibrated against the wood. Clara glanced at it, her facade cracking for just a second. A flicker of frustration, of impatience. The trap was about to spring. Time was running out. Anis could feel the air growing thin, the walls of the gilded cage closing in. Ren's gaze lifted from his plate and flicked meaningfully towards the swinging doors of the kitchen, then back to her. It was a silent order, a question that hung in the air between them. "Can you get me there?" Anis, turning to leave the table, gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The alliance, forged in a whisper and sealed with a dropped napkin, was now active. The game was in motion, and she was no longer just a player. She was a willing conspirator, a guide in the heart of the enemy's territory. The moment had to be perfect. A clumsy diversion would only heighten suspicion. It had to be organic, a natural part of the restaurant's nightly rhythm of controlled chaos. Anis saw her opportunity. A young busboy, barely out of his teens and clumsy with nerves, was carrying a large, circular tray laden with empty water glasses from a large party that had just departed. He was moving too fast, his balance precarious. Anis stepped into his path, seemingly preoccupied with a wine list. Their collision was inevitable, a carefully choreographed accident. The impact was soft, but the result was spectacular. The tray tilted, and for a heart-stopping second, the busboy tried to save it. Then gravity won. A cascade of glass erupted, shattering on the polished marble floor with a sound that was shockingly loud in the hushed dining room. Gasps rippled through the patrons. Conversation stopped. For a few crucial seconds, every single person in the room, including the cops at the bar and the tense woman in the red dress, turned their attention to the sound of the crash. It was the perfect diversion. In that instant of manufactured chaos, Ren moved. He stood smoothly, placing his napkin on the table. He leaned towards Clara, his expression one of polite apology. "Excuse me for a moment," he murmured, his voice calm and level, easily attributable to a man heading to the restroom. Clara, distracted by the commotion, could only nod, her eyes drawn to the mess of broken glass and spreading water. But Ren didn't turn right, towards the elegantly marked restrooms. He turned left, moving with unhurried purpose towards the center of the disturbance, where Anis was already on one knee, speaking soothingly to the flustered busboy and directing another staff member to get a broom. To any casual observer, he was a concerned patron, or perhaps just a man taking the clearest path around the spill. But his trajectory was precise. He was heading for the kitchen. Clara was sharp, though. Her professional instincts were screaming. Her head snapped back towards the table, her eyes searching for Ren. She saw his back as he neared the service corridor. She saw Anis, a calm authority in the middle of the small crisis she had created. The connection was obvious. Clara's hand darted to her crimson purse on the seat beside her, her fingers closing around the cold, hard shape within. She was seconds from blowing the entire operation. But she hesitated. She couldn't draw her weapon in a crowded restaurant over a man going to the bathroom. Her orders were likely to wait for him to leave the building. Her hesitation cost her everything. As Ren reached the swinging doors, Anis was there, handing a dustpan to another waiter. She didn't look at Ren, but her voice was clear and low as he passed. "Follow the main prep line past the grills. You'll see the walk-in freezer. The exit is a steel door to the left. It's electronically locked from this side. The code is 8686. Go now." She had given him the keys to the castle, the final piece of the puzzle. He pushed through the door without a backward glance, disappearing into the heat and noise of the kitchen. Anis stood up, her job done, and turned to face the dining room, her heart hammering against her ribs. Clara was staring directly at her, her blue eyes narrowed into chips of ice. The pretense was gone. She knew. The kitchen was another world, a symphony of fire and steam, shouting and steel. Chefs in white coats moved with frantic precision around roaring gas ranges and sizzling grills. The air was thick with the smells of garlic, searing meat, and simmering stock. To an outsider, it was utter chaos. To Ren, it was just another environment to be navigated. He moved through it with a preternatural calm, his dark, expensive suit an anomaly in this world of white aprons and checkered pants. He was a shadow, his movements fluid and economical, drawing no attention from the focused kitchen staff. He followed Anis's instructions perfectly, his mind a cold, clear instrument processing the tactical data she had provided. Main prep line, past the grills. He saw it, a long stainless steel island where vegetables were being chopped with furious speed. He moved past it, his eyes scanning, missing nothing. He saw the walk-in freezer, a massive, humming metal box. And to its left, just as she'd said, was a heavy, gray steel door with a small electronic keypad glowing beside it. He reached the door. His fingers, long and elegant, moved over the keypad with confident speed.
8, 6, 8, 6.
A small green light blinked, and a heavy magnetic lock disengaged with a solid thunk. He pushed the door open and was immediately hit by a wall of cool, damp night air. He was out. He stood in a narrow, grimy alley, the high walls of the surrounding buildings blocking out the city lights, creating a canyon of brick and shadow. The air smelled of stale grease, rain-soaked concrete, and garbage from the large metal dumpster a few feet away. And there, just as Anise had promised, was the sanitation truck, its massive bulk blocking the alley's mouth, a perfect metal shield against the street. Back in the dining room, the spell was broken. The last of the glass was being swept up, but the tension remained, thicker than ever. Anise was now the sole focus of Clara's cold, furious gaze. The dinner date was over. The charade was dropped. Ren had been gone too long for a simple trip to the restroom. Clara stood, her movements sharp and angry. She threw a few $100 bills onto the table, more than enough to cover the exorbitant bill. She didn't walk towards the exit. She walked directly towards Anise, her heels clicking like gunshots on the marble floor. She stopped right in front of her, her personal space invaded. Where did he go? Her voice was no longer the light, flirty soprano she had used with Ren. It was low, flat, and hard with authority. It was the voice of a cop who knew she had been played. Anise held her ground, her own training in customer service a surprisingly effective shield against the woman's intimidation. She met her icy glare without flinching. "The restroom, ma'am," she said, her voice steady, professional. Perhaps he wasn't feeling well. The lie was insultingly thin, a piece of gauze trying to cover a gaping wound. They both knew it. Clara's lips tightened into a bloodless line. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." She turned and strode towards the men at the bar, who were already on their feet, their hands inside their jackets. The trap had failed, and now the hunters were angry. Anise stood frozen for a moment, the threat hanging in the air. She had done it. She had freed the hawk from the cage. But in doing so, she had locked herself inside. Ren was not alone in the alley. Halfway down, nestled in the deep shadows beside the dumpster, a black sedan waited, its engine a low, barely audible hum. The driver's side window slid down as he approached, revealing the stoic face of one of his most trusted men. Ren got into the back seat, the door closing with a heavy, satisfying sound that sealed him off from the world. The interior was cool and smelled of clean leather. For a moment, there was only silence. He could leave. He could melt back into the city's neon-drenched veins, a ghost leaving behind a failed police operation and a few shattered careers. It was the logical move, the move of a survivor.
But he didn't give the order to drive.
Instead, he watched the steel door he had just come through. He had survived because he understood patterns, because he saw the consequences of actions ripple outwards. The waitress, Anise. She had not been part of the equation. She was an anomaly, an unexpected intervention. Her warning had been precise, her instructions flawless. She had saved him from a federal prison cell, or worse. And in doing so, she had marked herself. She was a loose end. The police, furious and embarrassed, would not let her go. They would see her as an accomplice, a willing participant in his escape. They would take her, question her, pressure her. They would use her to get to him. She would become leverage. He saw it all unfolding in his mind with crystalline clarity. Back inside, the dining room was transforming. The pretense of civility was dissolving. The men from the bar were moving with purpose, their casual postures gone, replaced by the rigid movements of law enforcement. They were speaking into their wrists, their faces grim. The restaurant manager was suddenly at the front door, turning away new arrivals with a strained smile, citing a sudden gas leak. The exits were being sealed. Anise, trying to retreat into the relative safety of the kitchen, found her path blocked by one of the plainclothes officers. He wasn't aggressive, not yet, but his presence was an impassable wall. She was being corralled, isolated. Ren saw it all through the narrow mouth of the alley, a silent, deadly play unfolding under the restaurant's warm lights. He had a code, a strict set of principles that had guided him through a life of violence and treachery. Debts were to be paid. Loyalty was to be rewarded. And those who placed themselves in danger for his sake were to be protected. The waitress had risked everything for him, a complete stranger. Leaving her to the wolves was not an option. It would be a violation of his code. He made the decision without a moment's hesitation. He turned to his driver. "Stay here. Keep the engine running." He opened the car door and stepped back out into the cold, damp alley. The steel door to the kitchen clicked shut as the officer inside cornered Anise. Ren walked towards it, his movements calm and deliberate. He had escaped the trap. Now he was choosing to walk back in. He was coming back for her. The officer blocking Anise's path was a big man, thick in the shoulders and neck, with a face that was used to intimidating people. He had her cornered between a stainless steel prep table and the swinging doors to the dining room. "We just need to ask you a few questions," he said, his voice a low, threatening rumble that was meant to sound reasonable. Anise knew what that meant. It meant she was a suspect. It meant her life was about to be turned inside out. Her heart was a frantic bird beating against the cage of her ribs. She was trapped. Suddenly, the heavy steel door from the alley clicked open behind her. The sound was quiet, but in the tense silence of the kitchen, it was as loud as a gunshot. Both Anise and the officer turned in surprise. Ren stood there, framed in the doorway, a figure of impossible calm and darkness against the grimy backdrop of the alley. He looked like something summoned from the shadows. The officer's eyes widened, his training kicking in. His hand flew to the weapon holstered at his side. He never had a chance to draw it. Ren moved with a speed that was terrifying, a blur of motion that seemed to defy physics. He closed the distance in 2 silent steps. There was no brawl, no clumsy exchange of blows.
It was a brutal, efficient science.
Ren's hand shot out, striking the officer's wrist with surgical precision, sending a shock of agony up his arm and neutralizing the threat of the gun. A second later, the edge of his other hand connected with the side of the officer's neck. The man crumpled without a sound, a puppet with its strings cut, collapsing in a heap on the tiled floor. Ren stepped over him, his face impassive. He took the unconscious officer's firearm from its holster, checked the safety, and then his dark eyes found Anise's. She was staring, breathless, at the silent, shocking display of violence.
"Come with me," he said.
His voice was not a request. It was a command, an anchor in the swirling chaos. For a split second, Anise's mind reeled. Go with a Yakuza boss, a man who had just incapacitated a police officer with his bare hands? Or stay and face a future in a windowless interrogation room, painted as a criminal's lover or a paid informant. It wasn't a choice. It was a jump from a burning building. She didn't know if she was jumping to safety or to her death, but she knew she couldn't stay. She ran. He grabbed her arm, his grip firm but not painful, and pulled her back towards the alley. As they burst through the door, shouts erupted from inside the kitchen. Someone had found the downed officer. The operation had just gone loud. They sprinted down the length of the alley, their footsteps echoing off the wet brick. The black sedan was waiting, the back door already open. They dove inside, and the door slammed shut behind them. The driver didn't need an order. The tires screeched on the wet pavement as the car shot out of the alley and into the flow of city traffic, disappearing into the river of headlights and taillights. Anise was breathing heavily, her body trembling with adrenaline. Ren, beside her, was perfectly still, as if he had just returned from a quiet stroll. He looked at her, his gaze intense in the dim light of the car. He saw the tremor in her hands, and then he saw the small, angry red line on her palm, a cut from a shard of glass during the diversion she had created. Without a word, he reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. He didn't pull out a weapon or a phone. He produced a folded square of dark silk, a handkerchief, immaculately clean. He took her hand gently, his touch surprisingly soft, and began to carefully wrap the silk around the cut. It was a small, intimate gesture in the wake of such brutal violence, a moment of quiet care that felt more profound than any words could be. The city streaked past the tinted windows, a glittering, indifferent blur of light and steel. Behind them, the first distant wail of sirens began to cut through the night, a sound that marked the end of Anise's old life. The car moved with silent, confident speed, the driver navigating the streets with an expert's knowledge, taking turns that seemed random but were undoubtedly part of a well-rehearsed plan. Inside the vehicle, a bubble of profound silence had formed. It was a strange, charged quiet, thick with everything that had just happened and everything that was yet to come. Anise stared at her hand, now wrapped in the dark, impossibly soft silk. The fabric was a stark contrast to her work-worn fingers, a piece of his world now bound to hers. She looked at the man beside her. A criminal. A man capable of breathtaking violence. A Yakuza boss. And the man who had come back for her. He broke the silence, his voice a low, steady sound that seemed to absorb the tension in the air. Why? It was the only question that truly mattered. Not how she knew or what she saw, but the motive. The reason she had risked everything for a stranger. Anise took a moment, gathering her thoughts, letting the adrenaline recede enough for her to find her own voice. She looked away from him, out at the city lights. It wasn't a fair fight, she said, her voice quiet but firm, without a trace of fear. You were being led to a slaughter. It was an execution, all dressed up with a tablecloth and a bottle of wine. I don't like executions, it was the truth, simple and unadorned. It was a statement of her own moral code, a code forged not in law books or boardrooms, but in the hard, unforgiving streets of her own past. Ren was silent for a long time, considering her words. He seemed to see the truth in them, to recognize a principle he could understand. A respectable reason, he finally conceded, a subtle note of approval in his tone. He then turned his gaze forward, his expression becoming serious. You need to understand what you have done. Your life, the one you knew this morning, is over. They have your name from the restaurant's employment records. They will have your photograph from security cameras. They will not see you as a good Samaritan. They will paint you as my accomplice. As a criminal. Every word was a cold, hard fact, stripping away any lingering hope she might have had of returning to normalcy. You cannot go home. You cannot go back to your job. You cannot call your friends. You are a ghost now. The finality of his statement settled over her, a heavy, suffocating blanket. She had known it, deep down, from the moment she whispered the warning, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. He let the weight of it sink in before he continued. By saving me, you created a debt. That debt is mine to honor. And by putting you in this position, I have incurred a responsibility for your safety. He turned to face her again, his dark eyes holding hers in the flickering city light. Stay with me, Anise. I will protect you. It was not a romantic proposal. It was not an offer of a new job. It was a statement of fact, a binding contract offered in the back of a getaway car. A dangerous, irrevocable offer to trade one cage for another, larger, more luxurious, but a cage all the same. Anise looked out the window at the blurred city, a place that had been her home just hours ago, and felt a profound sense of dislocation. Her small act of defiance had not just saved a man, it had thrown her out of her own world and into the heart of his. The car descended into a private underground garage, the heavy steel gate sliding shut behind them with a definitive boom, sealing them off from the city. They rode a silent, private elevator that opened not into a hallway, but directly into a sprawling penthouse apartment. The space was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the main living area, offering a panoramic, godlike view of the glittering urban sprawl below. The decor was minimalist and masculine, dark wood, black leather, polished chrome, and stone. It was less a home and more a fortress, an elegant, sterile command center high above the world. There were no photographs, no personal clutter, only a profound sense of order and control. This was Ren's world. You will be safe here, he said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast, quiet space. He led her through the apartment, past a state-of-the-art kitchen, and a living area dominated by a single, beautiful piece of calligraphy on the wall. He stopped at a door and opened it. This will be your room. It was a guest suite, but it was larger than her entire apartment. It had the same stunning views, a king-sized bed with crisp white linens, and an attached bathroom that looked like it belonged in a luxury spa. It was a gilded cage, indeed. He left her for a moment and returned with a simple black t-shirt and a pair of soft gray sweatpants. These should be more comfortable, he said, placing them on the bed. He gestured to the closet. There are other things in there. Whatever you need, just ask. The gesture was thoughtful, practical. He was treating her like a person, not just a problem to be managed. After she had changed, washing her face and hands in the marble sink, she found him standing by the massive windows in the living room, a silhouette against the city lights. He was holding 2 glasses, one of which he offered to her. It was water. They stood there for a while, in a comfortable silence, watching the endless river of traffic far below. The events of the night felt both immediate and impossibly distant. "They will tear your old life apart looking for you," he said, his voice calm. "They will talk to your friends, your family.
They will build a story about you.
In their story, you will be a villain, I know," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. She did know. She knew how the world worked. He finally turned from the window to look at her, his expression unreadable. He wasn't just interested in her as a liability or an asset anymore. He was interested in her. "Tell me about yourself, Venice." The woman who saw a trap, no one else did. "Where does that come from?" And so she told him. Not everything, but enough. She spoke of her childhood, of growing up in a place where you had to be smart to survive, where you learned to read people because your life could depend on it. She spoke of her quiet, disciplined life, her dreams of something more, something that didn't involve serving the wealthy and powerful. He listened, his attention absolute. He didn't interrupt, didn't judge. He simply absorbed her story. In turn, she saw glimpses of the man behind the fearsome reputation. A man who valued intelligence and courage above all else. A man who lived by a strict, if brutal, code of honor. A deep, powerful connection was forming between them, forged in the crucible of shared danger and mutual respect. The initial spark of attraction she had felt, the dangerous pull towards his quiet intensity, was now growing into something more complex, more real. It was the terrifying, exhilarating beginning of a new chapter, a story she never could have imagined. He came to stand beside her at the window, their shoulders almost touching. The space between them crackled with an energy that was more than just the aftermath of adrenaline. It was chemistry, raw and potent. "They will hunt you," he said, his voice a low promise. "And they will hunt me. But they will have to find us first." He reached out, not to touch her, but to hand her a sleek, featureless black smartphone. It was heavy, secure. "This is your new life," he said. As if on cue, the phone vibrated in her hand. She looked down at the screen. It showed a single incoming call from an unlisted number. A new beginning. A new set of rules. She looked from the ringing phone up to Ren's dark, watchful eyes. The question was there, unspoken. Was she ready? Anise took a steadying breath, the city lights reflected in her eyes, and answered the call.